the see if I can make it a little bigger. All right. Mike, can you hear us okay now?
Hey, yep, I hear you good.
Awesome. Okay, 1 second. Marcus is gonna mute the other machine.
Okay.
But yeah, so who are we? And then we'll dig into what the project is about. Let me move the Zoom thing out of the way so you guys can actually see the slides. So Mike, I'll introduce myself and then I'll hand it over to you. Used to run the third system as Splunk, currently at Lacework, essentially building shields is what I call it, build detections to catch threats, specifically not for cloud providers or against cloud providers. And Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah, thank you all. Yeah, my name is Michael Haag. I'm a threat researcher, still at Splunk. Yeah, by day, mostly focused on writing security content and, researching threats. And then at night is our little lull driver project.
So quick rundown of the agenda today, and I promise you this is probably, I hope, the shortest, but also one of the most valuable talks. It's really hard to top Casey's or Bryson, but be a short talk, but hopefully a bunch of value out of it. Is we'll talk about a bit of the problem statement that actually Mike was the one who pulled on this one first, and what a problem looks like with Windows rootkits specifically. How we'll dig, or Mike will dig into like what is the making of a vulnerable driver in Windows and what does that look like? Why is it important? And we'll walk through what does it adversary do with a vulnerable driver? How can they actually leverage it and abuse it? And then finally, we'll walk through some of the solutions we built to improve, I think, a huge gap we have today in visibility in our industry. Yeah.
Sweet, so, thank you, Jose. Oh.
Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so part of the problem with Windows drivers is that hunting down drivers for Windows is extremely hard. Drivers, there's a voluminous amount of them residing on every endpoint, and random third-party software will bring in some type of driver every now and then, and they will reside for many, many years. There's practically low to no reward to going after these things, and they just kind of sit there. There's also a very high complexity and inability to determine good ones versus bad ones. I remember prior when I was at Red Canary, we were digging through these things, and you'll find that like Broadcom will have a capital B one day and a lowercase b, or it'll end in a period, or there's no period. Like, how do I know which is the good one or the evil one when even these vendors can't even keep it straight? And then this one's a shout out to Casey Smith. It does require a high level of threat hunter to be able to find a malicious driver out there, but potentially a level 12 is what I hear.
The next engineer.
Yep. And this is something that drivers themselves have obviously been around a very long time. This goes back to the early 2000s and probably even before that, there's crap that we just don't know about. But what we're seeing now is the focus, the light is starting to shine on vulnerable drivers or even malicious drivers that adversaries are creating and getting past Microsoft and getting them signed. Even, parties are signing them and then they're bringing them in and using them in campaigns. And Microsoft's just saying, yeah, you're on my OS. Let's just roll, like hop on in the kernel. Let's do this. And it's the Wild West with these things. And it makes absolutely no sense that there's no better controls in place. Very recently, there was a campaign, and I listed all these are all just from this year, which is wild, right? Like there's even more. But the one of them that was really interesting was this campaign called the Black Lotus campaign that ESET had found. And it was actually a bootloader, but kind of similar. And they literally, the adversary goes in, disables every critical control that's supposed to prevent a bootloader from being replaced or installed on an operating system. This is crazy. Like, what's the point at this point? Like, it blows my mind every time I think about it, because it's just like, okay, like, let's just let them walk in. And that's where these drivers more or less start to fall. Go ahead and hit the next slide.
Sure, Mike, I was gonna ask the audience, how many of you guys use Windows as daily driver? Like a daily OS, right? How many of you guys have installed get some stuff going, right? Do you know if that was vulnerable to something or not? Most people don't even have a clue, right? Like, and yeah, so and to Mike's point, it's clearly getting used for disabling things, right? So yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, thank you, Jose. And so the making of a vulnerable driver is it's an operating system, a .sys file that will reside within Windows that interacts between, like the OS and the hardware. And they're pretty low level. They have extreme kernel privileges. They can kind of go do whatever they want. But what we're finding is that over the years is a driver from Asus or MSI or any motherboard manufacturer, Intel, things like that. These things happen to have bad coding mistakes and allow for an adversary to exploit that very much unknowingly. We will never hear about it publicly for the most part. It will be exploited. They will persist. They will reside on these endpoints for an extremely long time. And we actually just I think it was yesterday, Microsoft updated the Microsoft vulnerable driver block list that they have. They updated it with 2 new Asus drivers, and one of them was originally created back in 2007, and it's still hanging out there. And Microsoft is just now preventing it with their block list. And we saw this even more recently with other drivers that we're looking at. They'll receive a patch, and then it'll still be vulnerable to some other weakness within it, and it goes on for even longer. And this is the hard part with drivers. And so that's kind of where the project sort of starts to fall in line with how do we even identify, like, what's a good way for us to put all this together, and how do we expose these to anybody and everybody who wants to understand, like, what's on their endpoint. Hit it, sir. Thank you. And so I asked the question even to some others in the industry, like, what does a driver buy an adversary? Like, if I already have domain admin, or I'm already the administrator on a local machine, what does this buy me? Like, why would I need to bring in a driver besides a beer, right? Like, so for an adversary, it's sort of like that, hey, like, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to drop this and I'm going to persist on this endpoint. Or there's controls that they may want to bypass and just go straight into the kernel and instantly disable every preventative control, like, right off the bat, because AV has a really hard time preventing a driver. Why? Because drivers are meant to be trusted. They're meant to be something that Microsoft says is, hey, like, we put all these controls in place to prevent malicious drivers. So if a bad driver comes in, it should be instantly blocked or prevented. So AV's like, yo, I'm just sitting here looking at things and drivers are not bad. Microsoft said so. Like, only the ones on the block list are bad, right? And so AV struggles a lot. And we've seen this with the project, that as many as there is out there that we know about, Microsoft still doesn't prevent all of them. And AV typically sees none of them as malicious. And so it also buys adversaries the fact that they're extremely hard to detect. Most people are not digging through their drivers folder trying to determine good and bad, because again, that reward is very low. As a level 12 threat hunter, and beyond, you probably are digging through it, but there's so many out there who are not, and not even performing an inventory on these things across your whole fleet. So imagine if there's 200 drivers on one endpoint times 50,000 endpoints, you're going to be very busy trying to compare and all that. But I want to say that Windows is getting better. Microsoft is hopefully going to start pushing more out as far as their driver block list goes. There are the WDAC policies that you can implement, Windows Defender Application Control, which most of the lull drivers that we have today are prevented in that list, not all of them. And then Microsoft also has the HVCI, which is the Hypervisor Protected Code Integrity, which definitely helps. There's a lot out there. It's getting better, but there's still a bit of a struggle within that preventative part of the industry. Which leads us to living off the land drivers. Over the years, as I had been digging in or had first initially looked at or heard of like a malicious driver coming in and being used, there was no centralized place for me as a researcher or just someone digging into drivers to go and find these things. They were very spread out. There was an Eclipsium like GitHub markdown file. There was a tool called KDU. There was some like exploit devs like sharing a few here and there, or you end up like on a game research forum where they're sharing drivers to bypass the anti-cheat mechanisms and things like that. It's very scarce, very hard to find, not even that well talked about in malicious reports. We hadn't only really been seeing more and more drivers being used because I think more vendors are starting to see them, so they're starting to report on them. So the project begins to shine that awareness. There's, I want to say, over 600, 700 drivers in the project now. Is that right, Jose? Do you remember the count? 800? Too many?
It's up to 800, like it's crossing 800,
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, by comparison, I think the Microsoft block list has what, like 140?
I think so. Yep.
But just to
Yep.
again, yeah, we're tracking with this project about 800 different vulnerable drivers that we know can be compromised or used for compromises to disable defenses. Microsoft's out there blocking like 100 of them. So I mean, there's a gap. Again, there's a huge gap for abuse, and we're, to Mike's point, it's showing up in industry, like in attacker reports now, where like they're shifting to like just the drivers. You can you can disable your EDR, you can disable like OS system protections and be persistent at a kernel level. Sign me up. Like, right? And so, yeah. Sorry, Mike.
No, thank you. That's perfect. So yeah, and so now what we've created with the project is a place where researchers, analysts, whoever's interested can now go to one place and find all these things. And yeah, it's more exciting, Jose, if you want to go ahead and just kick off the demo and dive into it, because it's really cool.
So instead of talking about, let's show you what we can. So we put, before actually I dig into it, is anybody familiar with living off the land binaries or GTFO bins? No? Or so then you're gonna make that comparison, but it's similar to these projects in the vein of is trying to keep track of things that can be abused in your operating system, in this case drivers, by actors, right? And so, and let me zoom out here, I don't think you can see it too well, but there, you can see it. At a really high level, again, we're giving folks a breakdown of like, hey, what are the top products that are publishing drivers that we know are vulnerable? Like, hey, there's things like Trend Micro, ICE. Like, and again, this is not to call any names, but like, how many malicious drivers are we tracking for these guys? 34. Like, and so again, like highlighting, like, hey, here are products you probably want to double check if you're downloading drivers from, because we're tracking drivers that are vulnerable by them, and there's a handful amount, and also publishers, right? So some publishers like ASRock in this case, right? Like may not have products necessarily defined from the drivers, but yeah, anyway, so top products, top publishers. I'll come back to this section here in a second, but at a really high level, again, each driver, we give it a tag, and it's almost like a friendly name. It may have multiple tags, right? And again, like just to pick on more motherboards and things like this, right? Like the AMD Ryzen master driver that sits, right? That's vulnerability, right? And we're tracking the SHA, well, not just the SHA, but the main drop-down page, we're tracking the SHA, the drive. So if you're trying to look for it in your environment, that's the one thing we're using to tether like what the driver is, because the names may change, publishing, all the details may change. Mike, by the way, feel free to interrupt me anywhere along the way.
No, yeah, you're good.
Another thing that I think it's like somewhat important is like, hey, how fresh is this data, right? So like that's why we kind of we're putting that right up there. It's like, hey, when do we start tracking this driver, right? When you dig into any specific driver that we're tracking, we have this verified or not kind of system where one of the things that, again, like Mike notices is like a lot of the drivers that we were tracking weren't even like we couldn't even find them sometimes in VT. Like you will upload the hash in VT, they're not there. There's no matches, but they may be malicious nonetheless, right? So we started going down and tagging, hey, these are the ones that we were able to find matches in VT for. So we call them verified, right? The ones that we weren't able to verify because we don't know if they're malicious or not through sandboxing or whatever other system, we put it out there, hey, like we weren't able to verify that, right? And the idea is, again, the likelihood of a verified driver being, again, used and abused, it's more than unverified driver, right? Because you had a human kind of vet that through, right? Like your usual YAML, like stuff that help you track things, right? Like UAD, so on and so forth. This is a bad example, but some of this will give users like a command if they wanted to load that driver to test it, right? Another big thing here is like, we are actually downloading the malicious copy of that driver. You can download it and run it yourself if you want to test its exploitation, right? If you want to run a sandbox, so you can actually download the driver in here. Well, this is a pretty terrible example. Some of these have more information. I know there's let me DAX in here. It's only going to pick on one of those DAXing ones. They have more data on it. Yeah, here you go. So like, hey, here's an example of how you will be able to create a service with a driver to persist, right? Again, the mileage may vary on these commands, so just FYI, but give you an example. What operating system they're at least registered for or they're used for, what privilege level they'll run under, and then the project is built to have multiple driver examples. So we may have one friendly name for a driver like that AMD Ryzen, but there could be 5, 4, 6, 7 different versions of that driver out there, right? And so again, there's good. This is a list of essentially examples for those drivers. And the idea again here is that we're tracking not only their hashes and their authentic hash, but also like who publishes, when was the first time the driver was seen, was the last time the driver was seen. Any of these links are clickable to drop you right into the virus total, like lookup for that driver, right? You can see, hey, this is stacks malware, the agents that pick it up and all that good stuff. And then we also give you the functions that it's importing. If you're kind of like trying to reverse and look at what functions are being, what are the imports, what are the import functions, and the exports. And we recently added this like signature thing, like section where, Mike, actually, you want to cover this section?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is the actual like signing certificate information for the driver. And so part of our enrichment is we want to give as much information as possible, like in the simple UI that you're seeing. So everything's here, all like Jose was saying, all the import exports and everything like that. It's meant to just provide that additional intelligence back, which is, yeah, it's the most, I think anybody's ever seen as far as like a project like this has come all together. I also sent you another link, Jose, which has multiple drivers in one.
Oh, thank you.
In the chat. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so
yeah, this is yeah. Oh God.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, this is just another example that's showing sometimes we end up finding the multiple versions and all the different like file versions of the driver. So we're able to actually append all the hashes and all the metadata for each version inside one YAML. So yeah, it just kind of keeps going and going, but it has every version that we can find.
Quite a bit of data in there. But and by the way, all of this again. So actually, before I jump here, let me go back to the homepage. So what we do with all of this, so we got a database of drivers that we know are vulnerable or known to be used maliciously. And so we do a few things in an automated way on the back end, and that I think this is, in my opinion, one of the most important bits of this project. One is we serve all of this through API, right? So like, hey, anybody can come in and download their list of drivers to import into whatever their monitoring tool is, SIM, whatever, through JSON or CSV, right? Another big thing that we're giving there is a sysmon config, right? So I think this thing should be working. And so if you're running sysmon to monitor your endpoints, here is an entire sysmon config that will essentially look for all the drivers that we're tracking for you in your EDR, and you can alert right off your sysmon monitoring agent for that driver. And again, all these things are baked in an automated way through CI/CD in the platform. So new driver gets added, new sysmon config is out. There's also a Sigma rule for anybody out there who's using Sigma monitor things for detection purposes. There's a rule that, again, it's looking for all the drivers, and you can easily convert. If you're not familiar with Sigma, definitely check out Sigma. But it is almost like a universal SIM rule project, and then allows you to convert it to whatever. I'm probably butchering the explanation, but like that's how I think about it. Like universal SIM, you have one common language for describe detections, and then you can convert it to any other SIM, and then use it in that SIM, right? And so another big thing actually that's not yet in the homepage, but we just recently added in the repo is we're also generating now Yawa rules to hunt for drivers that we know are malicious or vulnerable, right? That update, hopefully it's like showing up on the site. It's on the repo, but it's not on the site yet, showing up on the site next week. But again, super powerful, right? Like now you have pre-built Yawa rules for you to be able to threat hunt or retro hunt on non-malicious drivers. Let's go to the repo for a second. And so again, repo's doing a few kind of interesting things in there, but one of the other cool kind of items that we added is we've built this whole thing with a purpose of making it as easy as possible for folks to contribute known drivers. It's a community project, right? Similar to Lova's living on the line drivers, like, hey, it only grows to the community, and we can't track this ourselves, but it's a lot better if the entire community contributes to what they're seeing as well, right? And so to make it easy to contribute and kind of keep a consistent quality of these drivers, we have also jobs of like, hey, when there's a new contribution, we'll check like, hey, is this a valid structure of a driver? And I'm talking about, I should probably show you what one of these drivers look like under the hood. Basically a YAML file, right? Describing each of the components you're seeing on the website. And so to contribute to your driver is easy. Write a YAML, make a PR against a repo.
But
we obviously
how you validate that I'm not contributing something good? For instance, I just didn't contribute something a good driver.
There's always a human reviewing those PRs on the other side. So it's not like I'll automatically include it. Somebody reviews it, but there's steps of review. Like there's an automatic step that would check, did you write this correctly to begin with? But like you can write a YAML incorrectly and not make it be usable, right? Like
there's a format, but I say if I'm trying to commit a kind of a really legitimate driver, how you validate that?
How do I know it's illegitimate or illegitimate driver?
Yes.
It's part of the like you would check, hey, is this seen to be used maliciously before? Is it exploitable, right? Or is it a driver that's never been seen to be exploited?
That's actually my second question. How overall you validate these drivers? How you get the information that this driver looks like vulnerable and so on and so forth? So it's kind of through some threat hunting over multiple sources, and hey, looks like these guys use that driver, and this is why this driver is bad, right?
That's pretty much it. A lot of it is so. And Mike, again, keep me honest here. Like it's a collection of
Yep.
right? VT threat hunting. Like I go to VT, like out of the list out there that I've seen of drivers that like hashes have been malicious. How many of them actually have hits? or not, right? That's how we say verified or not, right? The other thing is just researchers putting stuff out there and following up with the stuff they're putting. Hey, we saw this in an attack, and we saw it was malicious. All right, well, we know, run it against VT. Is it actually matching our engine? It is great. Like, let's add it to the list, right? So unfortunately, that's like the grunt work, right? Like, if that makes any sense, there isn't like a automated way to determine this is broken or not, right? As far as I know.
So technically, going deeper into the driver, it's just saying that it was used somewhere for malicious purpose, and then
Exactly, and then putting in a resource that any other defender then can use. Say, yeah, this driver got used. And so again, think about it from a defender's perspective. How will you use this? You download this list of drivers. You can do multiple things. You can run a sysmon. Hey, I just saw this driver pop up in an EDR. Like, I can block whatever that process, or at least send an alert to the SOC, letting them know. You can hunt in your infrastructure for it, right? And I'll show you guys a tool in a second that somebody in the community built to do that, right? So like, hey, I have a 100,000 endpoints. I'm gonna now inventory all their drivers and see how many of them are actually malicious. And then you correlate, like, hey, I had an EDR event and a malicious driver that I know of from this project, and something else happened. Should probably quarantine this box or deal, like, this is probably a threat, right? Like,
you also have CVEs too, that you're tying to specific exploits known for that driver curated as well, right?
Yep.
So the box driver, there's known
Exploit-
with the CVEs, yeah.
that's a good point. Sorry. So the known CVEs already attached to some of these, and I think we tag CVEs to some of the drivers. I'm not sure if we're doing that yet, but I know we talked about tagging.
Yeah, we haven't started tagging it yet. But yeah, so kind of to circle back on it, all of it is manual effort right now. And so the only way a driver can be verified true is if we're able to tie it back to an actual like campaign or Microsoft's block list and things like that. And it has it on VirusTotal or a resource for us to grab it. Because if we can't get the driver, but someone's saying it's malicious, how do we really know it's malicious? We don't want to just start shipping a hash and, saying it's bad, but it's really not. So that's, yeah.
That's the manual part in this project, for lack of a better word. One more thing I wanted to kind of hear. So that's loaddrivers.io and all the ways that you can kind of consume this data and use it. Quick recap. So you can either download stuff through API, JSON or CSV format. You have a Sigma rule if you want to hunt for it in your SIM. There's sysmon configuration file if you want to deploy to your EDRs for monitoring, right? And your endpoints. And also, again, there's a set of YARA rules now if you want to threat hunt for the drivers. There's also this cool little editor, actually, that Mike put together, that if you don't want to deal with GitHub, you don't want to deal with like creating editing a YAML there. It's a simple, hopefully it loads. I know it's super slow here, but it's a very simple like web UI that allows you to, like a form that you fill it out, saves it to disk, and that's your contributed driver, right? So again, trying to lower the bar of entry.
There's a screenshot on the slide, if it helps.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
So again, just fill this form out, submit it, and it'll generate a YAML for you just to give us a PR for it. This is super cool, actually. I think it's super cool. About 24 hours ago, somebody, Alvar, which is like, I think he's a consultant for TrustedSec. He was messing with the project. He's like, hey, I put together a quick PowerShell script that you pointed at the driver folder in Windows, and it'll download your list of drivers and tell you if there is a vulnerable driver in that list, right? And then somebody, Mike, actually, you were kind of messing with this. So Mike already had a version of a PowerShell script that did something similar. And then somebody jumped in, again, Twitter and the internet, right? Somebody else jumped in and was like, whoa, wait, I got this version. Let me anti-hash matching for it. And anyway, long story short, there's now a PowerShell script that you can literally point it at a driver folder and it'll tell you, hey, you have malicious drivers or not. So talk about community coming together, building tools to defend each other, right? And if you want to mess with it, here's the link. I'll also upload the slides. And these are the folders you want to point it at, right? depending on the operating system, your Windows version you're at, right? If you want to find vulnerable or malicious drivers in your environment, you can scan your computer right now. Literally hot. Literally, this code it's not even 24 hours old. So yeah, I remember I got super stoked about it. Like you're building something about it, right? You're building something like, and you find it interesting. You're trying to defend yourself with it, and then somebody else takes it and just runs with it, and it's like amazing, right? Random person on the internet, right? So takeaways, Mike. You want to do takeaways or?
Sure. Yeah. So biggest takeaways is this project, provides a way for you to begin using this today. We do have some WDAC information, and in our next release, we hope to have a WDAC file that we can share so folks can merge it or use it as a supplement. There's obviously like sysmon configs, which you can also configure sysmon to block drivers. And then Sigma, Sigma allows you to convert it to any SIM language. You can go hunt for it in your SIM if your EDR data has that, being shipped. Biggest thing here is try to prevent early. So try to block these things before they load. And then obviously the biggest piece that, it's still really hot is the fact that you're able to scan a local system very fast with just some quick Python or PowerShell, I guess. But yeah, everybody gets going and get started and start digging into some drivers.
Thank you for listening for 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you all.
Happy Saturday. Let's go enjoy the sun before it goes out. Like it's a beautiful day. I was like, look, let's make the talk quick so we can actually go out there, right? Like we're doing this in the sand. Mike, we're missing you here.
I know, miss y'all too.
Any Linux drivers? Maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, Linux doesn't necessarily have drivers. They have kernel modules, and we chatted about that. Like, hey, they're and it's very rare. Like Linux ships with the drivers in the kernel already most of the time, right? And so I can see like malicious kernel modules, but how often do you see that used? Like very rarely. Like the one the last I remember that I built a detection for a malicious kernel module was a dubrub or something like that. Whatever, right? Like dubrub, like some Russian malware, like state sponsored, very like APT-ish, not like commercial criminal, which is half the time the things that we're looking for. So I don't know. It's rare, but yeah, I don't know, Mike. I want to say Rootkits, but I don't want to give it away, man.
No, I mean, unless somebody tweets it. No, just kidding. No, yeah, our next kind of big thing we're gonna drop into the project is bootloaders, straight from the UEFI revocation list. So there's about 500 plus bootloaders that are supposed to be revoked for Linux and Windows and everything. I think maybe Mac, but I know Linux is there. But all of these bootloaders are supposed to be bad, and there's about 500, and we're able to retrieve about 127 of them through VirusTotal. So right now we're in the midst of generating all the YAML files and all the enrichment for those 127, and that'll be probably the next really big add to the project here.
Imagine people like as an actor, you're living bootloader land. Yeah. Like everything else loads after you. It's like goodbye defenses, like
yes.
On load drivers, Mike has been tracking this for quite a while, actually, since Red Canary days, right? For like I would say, I don't know, Mike, how long you've been at load, like looking at drivers? 3 years?
Yeah, it's been since 2017.
Yeah. The project itself, I think, came together the last 3 months, 4 months, maybe.
Yeah,
so
January.
The whole driver project itself,
yeah.
But Mike has been looking at vulnerable drivers for quite a bit. It's been I think a known issue or unknown issue. Like folks don't talk about it, and even actors weren't leveraging it at the scale they are today, right? But it's complete attack surface. Like that's why we're doing this thing, right? It's like a complete attack surface. Like even Microsoft block list is like not holistic. I don't know if that's the right word. But
do you know if any EDR vendors are doing something similar, maybe kind of in
They're getting disabled by the drivers, literally.
I mean, are they tracking the vulnerable drivers themselves?
I think most EDR vendors are like, Microsoft's got a block list. They're okay. Like, I swear to God, like, I don't think, I mean, Mike, I don't know, you know, I don't think most EDR vendors are
So
tracking vendors.
Microsoft is like doing it for, you said 100 or something drivers, right?
Right. They have a block list. Right.
Yeah.
A lot of the drivers that you mentioned, that you showed, were from security products themselves. So.
AVG, it's and again, the thing is like, great, EDR vendors tracking a malicious driver. The driver loads, EDR vendor is out of the system. So it's like, okay, great, you're tracking it, but what are you gonna do against it?
Yeah.
You gotta get it before it loads. That's the whole trick. Graphic card drivers, yeah, man, like there's
Motherboards.
a
Yeah.
evil man in there, like that's the scary part, right? And it again, nobody, like, very rarely, like, it's getting used by actors, but very rarely are folks talking about defending against it. And there's not, like, I think what fired up Mike about this, and then me consequently, right? Like, I was like, holy crap, like, how do we hunt for this thing? Like, well, that guy posted a blog, or that guy has a gist, but it's like, there wasn't a resource that we can go to, like, okay, yeah, this is an exhaustive list of known malicious drivers, right? That I can actually action right now. It was always like a piecemeal effort. And again, to your question earlier, it's that's a manual effort part of it, right? Like, there's not like a magic bullet to determine this driver is malicious, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes
Hey,
they'll show.
Jose,
Yep.
can you click the link I sent you in chat?
Yeah.
Please. Thanks. Yeah. I shipped this the other day because it drivers and bootloaders, it's just one of those things that, like, it's so hard, and it's hard even when folks are like, well, how do I know what's good or bad? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, somehow, some way we'll find the truth one day, but I really don't have the best answers. And Microsoft obviously is not, you know, they're trying, right? Like they're getting better, and they're really trying, but it's also just, you know, it's not perfect, and these things are still being abused, you know, very widely, and new ones are getting created every day and being abused, and it's just it's a wild one to go after.
Hope this helps. Got your alarm. Yeah. You said it. Thank you, Mike. Take care, man.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good day.